Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. I'm really happy to have Dan Rogers as our guest today. He is the CEO of LaunchDarkly, quite a storied background, former CMO at ServiceNow, former president at Rubrik, to name just two of the many positions he's held in sort of his up and to the right career. So Dan, thanks for making time to be with us today.
Thanks, Karen. I'm really looking forward to it.
Great. So I think we have to start by saying this interview is taking place on the 10th birthday of LaunchDarkly. So I'm sure there's a big celebration underway there. Can you talk a little bit about the company for our viewers who might not know about it? Yeah, just sort of what do you do? What's the value proposition?
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, thanks for, we're really excited. It's our 10-year anniversary. And of course, the anniversary celebrations go on all of this month. But if you rewind the clock to maybe 10 years ago, what you'll kind of realize is that, oh, is my camera working fine? Yeah, my camera's okay. What you kind of realize is that we had this whole industry of DevOps, and DevOps had this singular idea that we wanted to get our code from our laptop over to the servers as quickly as possible. But that really didn't touch on how we get the code to our customers. And so LaunchDarkly was founded on the idea of how do we separate the idea of deployment from release? Can we control what experience the users have as they consume the software? And so can we control the application as it manifests in runtime, not just the act of getting it from the laptop to the server? And that simple idea bore out the concept of feature management or feature flagging. And so 10 years ago, this powerful concept of feature flagging was really pioneered by Edith and John, who founded LaunchDarkly. Fast forward to today. Today, we have over 5,500 customers around the globe. And we really have ridden this wave of separating deployment from release. And we are the number one and innovator and pioneer of feature management. So yeah, we've really, I guess, started a category and crossed the wave as that category has become super relevant to every development team around the world.
That's great. Yeah. Well, congratulations. I mean, I'm thinking about that as sort of micro control for continuous deployment, something like that. And what a difference the ability to do that I know has made for many companies. So you're currently in the hypergrowth stage with over 100 million in ARR and, as you said, 5,500 customers and counting. How do you balance strategy and execution and being able to innovate during this period?
Yeah, in terms of the balance between strategy and execution, in my mind, it's pretty simple. Execution eats strategy for breakfast. So, innovation or strategy on its own without execution is kind of pointless. I mean, execution without strategy is definitely aimless. So you need to have a great strategy, get everyone pointing in the same direction. But then it really is the hustle, everyday competition. It's the pivoting. It's the day-to-day reality of decision-making, of effectiveness, of how you conduct the meetings, of how you actually manage each and every day, each and every week, each and every hour, that where the differentiation really happens. So there's no doubt in my mind on the battle between execution and strategy. Execution wins every time. And the reality is only by executing effectively do you know if you had the right strategy at all. Because it could be the case that you actually had the right strategy, but if you didn't execute against it, you'd never actually know that that was the right strategy. It just led to the same outcome. So by doing things, by launching things, by putting things into market, we actually learn how well they're received. And the only arbiter, the only judge is the customer. So the customer decides if the things that we did were right or wrong. So we have a pretty quick response time on anything that we do. It's, did the customer use it? Did the customer like it? We are obsessed with developers. We're a developer-focused company. And so we get pretty instant feedback on any feature that we build or any program that we run or any change that we make to, say, pricing or our website. Did the developers who interact with us every day love it? And fortunately, we have thousands, tens of thousands of developers interacting with us every day. So we get near instant feedback. So our reality is we have a core principle at LaunchDarkly. We call it get your 80-20 rolling. And the idea is put something out there and then the jury will speak, and the jury is the developers that we serve. So yeah, that's kind of our notion, is an execution machine, a flywheel that just keeps on turning, where we learn, iterate, and improve every time. And a pie in the sky strategy just doesn't do much for that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you for the soundbite and turning what's the original term, strategy execution for lunch, turning that on its head. So, but you must have a process internally for saying, okay, this is where we want to go from a strategy standpoint, but then just continuously debriefing against how are we doing from an execution standpoint. What's your process internally for that?
Well, a lot of it starts again with the customer. And so we have
Mhm.
this notion of another principle that we have that's called customers on speed dial. And this is the idea that everyone needs to be very close to the customer. Everyone needs to bring customer feedback into every conversation. Jeff Bezos used to have a proverbial seat that he'd leave at the table for the customer for every conversation. We have the same mental model for this: what the customer do, what a customer is buying, what are they saying, how are they reacting, and we bring that into the strategy process. We have a formal strategy process that we of course run, but it's very much centered on innovation, which is around what new things can we do, what problems do we need to solve, what use cases do our customers need from us. And then the voice that wins is the voice that brings in the most customer examples around things that our customers are doing and things that our customers want. And so we're very close to them, obviously, through user conferences, through advisory boards, but also just the daily picking up the phone and chatting with
Mm.
customers about what's next, how they're experiencing us, what they want to see. This is the reason why, on many of the analyst reports and many of the peer reviews, LaunchDarkly is, again, as you say, up and to the right, because we're so responsive to the needs of developers and developers' day-to-day tasks and how to improve their life, how to improve their productivity.
Yeah. Wow. So that's such a powerful yardstick, if you will, to have the loudest voice be the customer voice in the room. And what a great guiding principle for a company, particularly one who does what you do, that's so closely tied to that. Could you talk a little bit about, I think, feature flags are the term, sort of how that has evolved or evolving in modern software development?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll do it through the lens of a customer, and as we just talked about in the prior
Mhm.
answer. So I think of it as kind of a maturity journey. The first thing that you're going to want to do if you want to speed up the innovation of your teams, if you want to ship code faster, is be able to push out code into production very quickly. And you want to have the confidence that you can do that while turning things off that aren't working. So let's imagine a given release of software. Maybe it has 60 features. If you're able
Mhm.
to compartmentalize those features using feature flags, then you can propagate and push out all 60 features in the release. And maybe one of them is not performant. Maybe one of them has some errors associated with it. Well, feature flags allow you to turn that feature off, while the
Mm.
other 59 features go ahead and propagate and get out there in the world. Now, in the prior life, what would happen is companies would have endless testing because they're so worried about how this thing is going
Of
to
course.
manifest in the real world. But with us, that risk is lowered because we can actually push it out in production and then within 200 milliseconds, turn things off at the feature level. So because you have that safety valve, you're actually encouraged to release things a lot faster. So if
Mhm.
you take a company like Vodafone as an example, prior to engaging with LaunchDarkly, they released their software once a quarter. But with LaunchDarkly, they now release their software 360 times a month, which essentially means they're pushing out innovation into the world, innovation that customers get to experience, their customers get to experience, their users get to experience, that allows them to differentiate from their competition because they're right on the pulse of, think it, come up with the idea, push it out into the world. And if it doesn't work, we'll turn it off. And it's only really where it's out in the world, out in production, you actually see how the software is really manifesting. So that's the first phase, is de-risking your release process, giving you the confidence to release quickly. Once you have that notion, then you can get quite sophisticated. You can actually use our technology to target software to given users. So if you take a company like Dior has real-time targeting. They may target particular buyers in a particular region, in a particular store, with a particular software experience, or on a particular device with a particular software experience. Now you can truly customize and personalize software experiences to a given audience or a given context. So this is as you have this first notion of separating deployment from release. We're going to be able to rewind features that don't work.
Mhm.
Now we're saying you can actually target features to specific users and to specific devices. So now you have the power of software to a unit of one, potentially.
Mhm.
So this is as you get slightly more sophisticated, you move from not just moving up and accelerating the frequency of releases, but also targeting those releases to given users. Maybe you want to target every software release to 1% of your users instead of 100% of your users. So that every single time, by default, as part of your progressive release strategy, you always test at the 1% level and never at the 100% level until you're absolutely confident that that experience is great. And then as you get more sophisticated still, again, once you have this notion of a feature, you can think of a feature as a mini business. The reason the
Mhm.
software team worked on a feature is they had a theory. That feature was going to be great because X was going to happen. More people were going to convert, or it was going to ease the
Mhm.
speed of the checkout process, or it was going to create some delightful new revenue stream. Well, what if you could actually attach a metric to that feature to see whether the hypothesis, the business hypothesis of that feature, actually came true? And so we think of each feature as a mini business, each feature as a chance for an
Mhm.
experiment. And you could do a variation of that feature and see which one wins. Classically, that's called an A B test, which is essentially the
Mhm.
notion of I have an idea of a feature, you have an idea of a feature that's different than my idea. Which one wins? Well, LaunchDarkly, we can serve as the control point for doing that test in production with actual customers. Then whichever feature actually wins, we'll push over traffic to that winning variation. So now suddenly you've got the ability to speed up innovation, de-risk that innovation, create personalized targeting, and also deliver experimentation for every feature so that product teams, data scientists, and engineers can actually perform those experiments right there on that feature, as was designed in the very beginning idea of the feature itself. So these concepts all become very relevant when you think about AI. So if you think about a given generative AI project,
Mhm.
generative AI is pretty unique. What's unique about generative AI is a given project is only manifesting itself in a production in real time, in runtime. It has this unique quality that it is a non-declarative or non-deterministic model for AI. You're not quite sure what the chat experience is going to look like until you push it live. You're not quite sure what recommendations are going to happen until you push it live. It's a probabilistic model that actually works in runtime. Well, because of that, you're going to probably want to have the control over that feature to turn it on and off if you don't like it. You're going to want to have the ability to target, as we talked about, to a specific set of
Mhm.
users who want that capability. And you're also going to want to have the ability to experiment and see which prompt worked, which model worked, which set of configurations worked. So AI is the perfect use case for all of those concepts and principles of the LaunchDarkly platform. So
Mhm.
customers go along this maturity journey with us. They begin with just kind of feature flagging, and then they add on sophisticated targeting. They'll monitor those releases, they'll experiment with those releases, and then finally they'll apply all of this to their AI projects.
And I think that's all so exciting in many ways. This idea of being able to understand and deal quickly with unintended consequences, which existed before AI, but it's just like on steroids now or some turbo. That there are unintended consequences, and many of those I'm sure are good, and some are not. And to be able to turn those things on and off is a huge capability. What advice would you give to companies that are just starting to implement feature management practices?
Yeah, well, I'll just pick up first with your last comment around AI. I think it's exactly right. Generative AI projects will generate a lot more code. This whole
Yeah.
system is about to be tested, severely because the amount of code that's being generated is exponential. The amount of new applications that's gonna come to pass is
Mm.
exponential. The amount of new features and new capabilities is exponential, which is why you're gonna need all these solid foundations, because it's gonna be a real test of your ability to de-risk those releases, your ability to turn things off that aren't working, the ability to test in production, the ability to test in real time, and turn things on and off and experiment, as you say. And so, yeah, I'd say, where do you start on the journey? You really start at the beginning of that maturity idea. You start with the idea that we want to separate deployment from release. We know that we want the ability to control who gets our software and when they get it. And so, firstly, the first notion that we try and encourage customers or companies to engage with is progressively releasing your software. Don't release 100% of your features to 100% of your users without first knowing whether 1% of your users are actually enjoying that experience. Without, at the 1% level, as an example, knowing whether you're creating any performance issues with the latest release. And when you have that certainty, only then should you release to the 5%, to the 10%, to the 100%. So the idea, one of the interesting studies that we conducted showed that of customer-facing software issues or customer-facing incidents, 82% of those happen because of self-induced issues by the company in the software change process. So what do I mean by that? When you have a buggy experience as an end user, the most likely reason for that is because the company themselves have released buggy software. And so with the notion of buggy software, our idea is you should never have a situation where 100% of your users are experiencing that. That's just not obeying the laws of progressively rolling out software. And so we think the blast radius of any software issues should be very small if you get your rollout process right and if you have that ability to monitor those releases. So I'd say start there, start with that notion of decoupling deployment from release, then work into targeting experiences to given users. Maybe you want to target by region, maybe you want to target by device type. And then once you have that notion, monitoring those releases to make sure that you're catching things early, not at the 100% level, but a lot earlier. And then once you have that notion, yes, of course, think about experimentation and variation of features and making a culture of experimentation. And then you're really ready to roll with a really robust platform.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many companies I know that would love to have a culture of experimentation, but the risks are too great. And so having a way to de-risk is phenomenal. So I hear you on sort of on the cusp here of what's possible, and yet I have to ask, what's next for LaunchDarkly? I'm sure you're continuing to innovate and make changes.
Yeah, well, let's pick up from the cultural experimentation, as you kind of just mentioned there. So, experimentation as an industry has had some false starts. I'd say maybe 5-10 years ago, experimentation used to be the purview of marketers. As you mentioned, marketing was really kind of, where I came from in my prior life. And marketers love to experiment with the front end of websites. They love to experiment, but they did it in a way that was entirely detached and decoupled from the engineering teams. And so our notion of how do you create experimentation as a mainstream culture is that you bring it into the purview and the power of where the feature actually lives. And it's the software engineers, it's the developers who own features. So what if you could bring experiments to software features and let product managers, let marketers, let data scientists in to that purview so that they can all see and construct experiments, but ultimately you had the control over the feature at the software level. And so this is how we believe experimentation is actually going to become mainstream. It's going to be about making this egalitarian, bringing experimentation to the rest of us via the control panel or the control plane of a software engineer, which is the feature. So bringing features and experimentation together, we think is going to light this spark. Why is that relevant? As we talked about, for many of these net new projects, if you're going to be very creative around software, you're going to want to do experiments. And in fact, product managers are going to have more and more disputes amongst each other about which variation wins. Should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? We love those kind of, let's call it, thought problems, because we can actually manifest that in an experiment. Yeah, exactly. Data trumps. And in fact, we don't even nowadays need to analyze the data ad infinitum. We can, in the models that we use in, say, the LaunchDarkly platform, quickly tell you which experiment wins in a statistically relevant way, and then push traffic to the winning experiment, the winning variation. So yes, this notion of constant adjustment of software experiences, constant tuning of software experiences in runtime is definitely it's really I think where the industry is going. This ability to target given experiences to given users, figure out if it works, and then push it out quickly to everybody else, I think is definitely what we've arrived at the ability to do now. And as I say, things like AI is just the perfect test case for experimentation.
Yeah. Well, I'll say the engineer in my background is grinning, big grins. So I imagine that LaunchDarkly has a culture of experimentation. Can you say more about LaunchDarkly's culture, and how did you influence the culture when you came in with your experience and background?
Well, I was very lucky. Edith and John, who are the founders of LaunchDarkly, built an amazing company. And I would say, all of the success of LaunchDarkly really rests on their leadership and their leadership team. And they did a very successful transition of founder really to me and founding team to me, which is very rare. People have that ability to do that and the foresight to do that. So, huge credit to both Edith and John. And they built something very special. The single, I'd say, idea of our secret sauce is we are a developer-focused company. We're for developers, by developers. We're obsessed about the developer experience. That kind of oozes out of our pores. And so I had to keep that and bottle that. The bottling, the idea that above all else, all we have to do is develop solutions to developers' problems, to solve them every day, and then help them be successful, and we will be successful. So that was kind of the core notion that overrides absolutely everything. I suppose the pieces that I bring to it is really much about velocity and execution, how you focus on continuing that drumbeat of innovation, making sure that we are shipping products fast. That's really what we're trying to help our customers do, shipping software experiences fast. We have to do that ourselves. We do about 60 to 70 software releases a day. And so we are pushing out software innovation, probably this minute, probably next minute. And so we have a constant idea of let's push out new experiences, let's test them in production, and then let's push out winning variations. And so really every little thing that we get feedback on, we improve it almost instantly. And that's how we kind of get better. So I have to harness that velocity and make sure we continue that velocity. But the thing that really gets me excited is expanding the set of problems that we solve. And so, it was the case that because we're so beloved and so trusted at this point, 25% the Fortune 500 are our customers, that they ask us to solve more things. They ask us to solve more things in and around the release. They want to know everything about the release. They want to know which feature is winning, which feature is working. They want to know, am I about to induce any performance or latency issues into this release process? They want to know, how do I make it easy to do experiments? They want, so many things that they want to know in and around the release. That's the platform that we're really trying to build here. A single platform that has not just feature management, but also experimentation. It also becomes a platform for prompt engineers to do all of their experiments and their runtime testing. And then a platform that allows you to monitor those releases in runtime.
Wow. I'm just thinking about the dopamine hit that I get every time I get data and it gives me information that I can do something with, something actionable, and what it must be like to work in a culture where that is sort of continuous. It sounds amazing.
The trick with data, though, is that you can drown in a sea of data as well. So it's about providing an insight from that. Yeah. And over time, I suspect that what will really want to happen is that we'll want to create and suggest actions based on that data so that we actually go one step further, and where we kind of say, perhaps because of that data from a given experiment, this is what you want to do. And over time, perhaps we learn your preferences. So we actually start to do those things automatically. Yeah. One of the capabilities we actually have in our platform is we will we'll generate experiments for you for a given feature. So we'll say, you have a feature, perhaps you want to consider this variation of the feature based on everything we've learned over the hundreds of thousands of experiments that have been done on our platform. So I think the idea of taking that data, turning it into insight, turning it into prompts, suggestions, and then over time, perhaps into automated action, I think is where we're going.
Mm. Yeah, great. And of course, you'll have metadata about the system gathered as well. That's terrific. So we just have a few minutes left. I want to make sure I get to a couple of questions about you from a leadership standpoint specifically. One of the things I'm really interested in is the role that the ability to be comfortable with ambiguity plays for senior leadership, specifically in growth companies where there's a lot that's ambiguous. So, how do you deal with ambiguity? It's inevitably part of your role as a CEO.
One of the things about my background is I have experienced many different walks of life, many different countries. I've moved
Hmm.
so many times, and I happen to have been in some really great cloud software companies as kind of I grew up and built my skill set. And so I say that to kind of say that at this point, I've seen so many changes in so many variations of technology companies that nothing scares me too much. And so I'm very comfortable in the idea of ambiguity. And in fact, one of the things I read recently from Marcus Aurelius is this notion that it's through this ambiguity, through these challenges, through these obstacles that we actually learn the way. I think he said the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And I love this notion that you have to live in that ambiguity. You have to love that ambiguity, synthesize all the complexity, create something simple through that pathway through that ambiguity. And that's how you learn, that's how you grow. And by the way, wash and repeat every week, because net new influences are going to happen, net new inputs are going to come into the system. So you're going to have to be constantly simplifying, constantly synthesizing. And in doing so, you'll create the way. And so I think the idea that you could have a master plan that you kind of set in stone and you're just going to follow it for the next 5 years is quite obsolete. The net new forces, the industry's changing so fast, you have to be able to sit in that ambiguity, synthesize, create clarity, and as I say, wash and repeat and do it again. So, I love the ambiguity. Honestly, it's exciting. It's the challenge. It's part of the fun. And I think as a leader in a fast growing tech company, you have to be able to synthesize a lot of inputs and create simplicity and create clarity. And that's the job of every leader, is to create clarity, particularly in the times of ambiguity. And ambiguity is, I'd say, the grist for the mill for a technology company.
Yeah, well said. There is no steady state, right? We fool ourselves if we think otherwise. So that was really well said. Thank you so much, and thank you, Dan, for joining us today. I learned a lot. I'm sure our viewers did as well, and I really appreciate it. And wish you and the LaunchDarkly team all the best. And again, happy 10th birthday.
Thank you very much, Karen. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.